After 20 years together, a North Carolina couple were living their best life with no sign of slowing down.
He had served his time in the military. He was going to enjoy life.
She was funny. She had a little feistiness to her.
I would describe him as the perfect neighbor.
But when gunshots ring out at the couple's back door, their life together is shattered.
He was clutching his chest. He still had his pipe in his mouth.
Multiple gunshot wounds, meaning the killer was going to make absolutely sure that this man was dead.
The search for the murderer spans generations and uncovers multiple victims.
I just stared at it. 52 years and 5 dead men.
All of them were dead by suspicious circumstances.
The first one was shot in the back of his head. The second one, he died on a pier. The third one, I know, was shot. The fourth one was shot. And the last one, they say maybe he was poisoned.
He was cremated before they knew he was dead.
Can police catch a serial killer a half-century in the making?
All kinds of things went to the lab. There was a governor's reward.
We just trying to keep digging. Every turn we took us to some crazy place.
July 14th, 1986, Norwood, North Carolina. 35-year-old Emery LaHue and his family get a phone call.
It was Monday afternoon, and by the time we got through supper and everything, the phone rang.
On the line is a concerned relative of Emery's 48-year-old neighbor, Harold Gentry.
Harold was one of those people that he never missed work. And when Harold did not show up for work on Monday, it was very unusual.
I didn't know what to think, really. I said, well, just go see what's going on, you know.
The Gentrys lived in a single-story ranch-style brick home in Norwood. It was seated in a rural area.
The glass sliding door was open. And I went in there and I saw Harold laying in the floor. He was just inside the door, laying face down. He was clutching his chest. He still had his pipe in his mouth. There was blood there around his head. There's quite a bit of blood there, you know.
Police are immediately called to the scene.
The law enforcement agencies responded, EMS responded.
I stayed in it until the sheriff's department got there. Then other people started coming in, the law enforcement stuff, so I just got out of the way.
It's clear to first responders that it's too late for any life-saving efforts.
He was shot many times. Harold Gentry was dead.
Betty Neumar, at that time Betty Gentry, she had a pretty ironclad alibi. I mean, it was pretty clear, I think, to investigators in 1986 that she was not the trigger person. Okay, somebody else clearly was the trigger person because she had a pretty rock-solid alibi of being out of the state. We had evidence of her being in 2 states away at the time that the shots were fired. So she could not have done it. Now, to me though, could she have pointed the gun through the hand of another and had that done? That's more like, that is what happened. That's what I believed happened after the investigation was done. She was charged with solicitation to commit murder. She wasn't charged with the murder. The problems with it was that the evidence to prove the solicitation was in the file from 1986, but nobody acted on it, okay? And the reason, I don't really know why it was not acted on. I had heard that they were hoping, the investigators at that time, I knew them, some of them, they were extraordinarily good investigators. They hoped and believed that if they continued to work it and did not move on the person right then, that information would shake loose that would allow them to either prove she pulled the trigger or lead them to someone who did. Because, you know, if she continued to solicit the murder and had found someone to take her up on it, then that's the person you're looking for to do the killing. You follow me? Okay. So they were hoping that by delaying it, they would gain more information. Sometimes you hope that people who do those crimes will make a mistake. They'll go to a bar, they'll get drunk, they'll say something, you know, and that's what you hope over time. Well, that information was there. The legal problem to me was the fact that the information that they had found in that file was such that we could make an arrest for solicitation to commit murder. But my concern was the fact that whether or not it would violate the due process of the Constitution, because if they could have arrested her in '86 for it and they didn't arrest her for 20 years later, if I'm her lawyer, that's what I'm going to object to. And so my position was that, all right, if that's what you want to do, then you got to find me something else that did not exist or we did not know in 1986. I wanted to know, I want something more than what they had in '86 to be able to do this. And they found that for me. And so when they found that, that was when I felt comfortable enough proceeding with that charge. That was another witness who had told them about her attempts to solicit someone to murder them. It corroborated the one witness we had from that time that we didn't have a lot of corroboration on at the time. The thing I'm most proud of in the case is the work that Laura and my detectives did 20-some years after the fact to bring about a prosecutable case and to make an arrest in a case that was over 20 years old at the time. That's the part that I was proud of. And even if we had lost, if we had gone to trial, I would still be proud of that because I know that we would have done the best we could do with what we had.
I was in Tampa, Florida going to college. And I was dating a guy named Tex at the time. And his mom and dad came down. And at that time, Tex was in the Coast Guard. So I didn't know if something had happened to him or what, you know. Sort of threw me. But his mom and dad came down, and when his mom told me I needed to sit down, I was like, oh boy, something might have really happened here. And when she come out and she said that my dad had passed away, and they were going to take me back to Ocala, and then my sister was waiting on me to bring me on up to North Carolina. And my sister had went on at that point because she felt that she really needed to get up there and be there for my mom. And so they had said that they would drive me up. So they went ahead and took me up to North Carolina, And so my college days were about over at that point. I was beyond stunned and shocked. I think I was in a point of denial. I was like, this is a cruel joke, you know, and I told Tex's mom, I was like, this is not funny. And she goes, that's why your mom had me come do it, because she knows you would know that this is not a joke. And I said, okay. And I said, so how am I getting? She said, well, you ain't driving. I said, I can go, I'll be okay. And she's like, no, you're not driving. So they drove me up to North Carolina. And when they got there, we walked in the back door, and the first thing I saw was this big piece of carpet that had been cut out. Stanley County investigators had come up, and they were asking her questions about my dad's death. I said, okay, do they have a lead on who killed him? She says, no, they're asking me, who did I hire? I said, what? And she said, yeah, they're asking me, who did I hire? I said, Mom, I know better than that. And she goes, no, they really think that I'm the one that did it. I have not grieved my mother's death. My father, how did I grieve my father? I folded my father's flag and gave that to her. I think that was a lot that helped me get through it. And then I went straight into the military myself. I went into the Army. And I think the Army helped me grieve some. I will never be done grieving my father until I find out who was the one that pulled the trigger. My mother, thanks to the media, I didn't get the chance to grieve her when she passed away. And I don't know at this point if I'll be able to ever get over it. I would like one question answered. And it's the only answer that really matters. And that's who killed him. You know, and if they want to say she tried to hire somebody, not who hired somebody. I want to know who killed him, plain and simple.
I'm not a Betty Neumar fan, you know, like I don't buy her story, but I am not a person that accuses anybody of anything. That is not my role. That is the judge and jury's role to judge a person in their guilt or innocence phase of a trial. I am an information gatherer, an information interpreter, and that is it. It's just not my place, and it's not ethical to pass judgment on her. And it is true that there is no evidence against her in the deaths of Clarence Malone, James Flynn. There is evidence that is consistent with a potential homicide in the case of Dick Sills. There's evidence consistent with potential solicitation to commit murder in the death of Harold Gentry. And it is unknown, undetermined, and inconclusive on John Neumar.
I'm a pastor now, and my prayer is that she made it right with God before she died, and that's the judge. Even in her own words, she said she was going to be judged by him. That's that's my hope, and there's no evidence that she did, to my knowledge, and none of her fruit bears any of that. But you never know. You never know. And so that's my hope, is that she made it right before she died. I feel bad for the families of these men. And I think that's where it comes in that I wish it had gone to trial. There would have been some satisfaction for each one of those families had she been convicted of anything.
I don't think there's zero evidence that she had any shooting, that she had anything to do with the shooting. Zero. I think the best the state could get was the solicitation that she tried to hire somebody to do the killing. And that was a stretch. I promise you, if they thought they had enough evidence to tie her to the murder, a scintilla of evidence to tie her to the murder, enough to get a warrant or an indictment to say that, they would have tried. So that in and of itself, in my opinion, shows a little bit of weakness in that case.
Like I used to tell my officers sometimes, well, okay, we may lose, I'm not talking about this case, but we may lose that case, but if they're gonna walk free, we need to let a jury of 12 set them free, because I'm not gonna do it. Okay, the evidence is so strong that the community needs to hear it, and they need to decide whether or not that person is guilty of that crime. That, to me, was the Neumar case. They needed to hear the evidence and let the jury and let the community decide, because there had been rumors and talk about it in the community for 20 years. You know, that's the kind of case that the community needs to know what happened there, and they need to make that decision. And so that was my belief in bringing the charges. And I also felt like, now I will tell you, I've never prosecuted anybody I didn't believe was guilty.
I want my dad to be remembered as a hard worker. He was the type that if somebody needs something, he would be there to help them, or either try to help them out, you know. I will miss the smell of Sir Walter Raleigh, because my dad smoked a pipe, but yet he'd get on somebody for smoking cigarettes in a heartbeat. Even though my mom smoked, he never got on her. I want my dad to be remembered as a veteran, a man who served his country, not just one war, you know. He was there for Vietnam and Korea. And he was just a fun person to be around. He could make you smile even on the most miserable day of your life, you know. And I want him to be remembered as a grandfather that would get out and play ball with the kids, even when he probably shouldn't have been, you know. But he was just something else. They both were.
The